Imagine you are sitting across from a client. Let's call him Leo.
Okay, setting this
Yeah,
up.
it's a Tuesday afternoon. It's totally quiet in the clinic room, and you're administering a baseline skill assessment.
Right.
You're trying to figure out exactly what Leo knows and, what he still needs to learn. So you place 2 picture cards on the table right in front of him.
Mm.
You ask Leo, point to the dog, and he hesitates. His little hand just sort of hovers over the picture of the cat.
Oh, man. I know this feeling.
Right. He looks up at you, and his eyes are just silently pleading for a little reassurance. And I mean, you are a human being. You're a compassionate person.
That's literally why we get into this field.
Exactly. So instinctively, without even really thinking about it, you give him this gentle, encouraging smile. And maybe your eyes just slightly flick toward the picture of the dog.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Leo sees it. He points to the dog. You smile. He smiles. It feels like a total win, right? You kept his confidence up. It feels like the absolutely right thing to do in that moment.
It really does feel right.
Yeah. But here's the brutal truth. In that one split second, you just completely invalidated the entire assessment.
You really did. I mean, in that single well-intentioned microsecond, the data you collected stopped being a measurement of Leo's independent skills.
Wow.
Yeah, it started being a measurement of your ability to give hints. And in the world of behavioral science, that is a catastrophic failure of measurement.
But I have to push back on this right out of the gate because, honestly, this is so hard to swallow.
I know it is.
If I don't give him that hint, he points to the cat, he gets it wrong, he feels totally discouraged, he might shut down, and the rest of the session is basically ruined.
Yeah, that's the fear.
So how is it ethical or even clinically useful to just sit there like a robot and let a kid fail when I know a tiny smile could help him succeed?
It is incredibly difficult to override that human instinct. But you have to look at the long-term stakes rather than the short-term comfort.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Think about what happens to that data. You write down that Leo successfully identified the dog. That data goes straight to the supervising behavior analyst.
Right, the BCBA.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The analyst looks at it and says, great, Leo has mastered animal identification. We don't need to put that in his treatment plan.
Oh, wow.
So for the next 6 months, Leo never receives the systematic, dedicated teaching he actually needs to learn his animals independently. Your desire to help him in that 10-second window has actively deprived him of months of necessary clinical intervention.
That's heavy.
You gave him a false positive.
When you put it like that, I'm essentially robbing him of an education because I wanted him to feel good for 3 seconds.
That's exactly what it is.
That tension, that massive conflict between our human nature to help and the strict, unforgiving requirements of scientific measurement is exactly what we are exploring today.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. So, welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to thoroughly unpack the behavioral assessment process. We are looking specifically at the reality of being a registered behavior technician, an RBT, and participating in assessments of a client's skill strengths and deficits.
Which is such a vital part of the job. Welcome to Behavioral Intelligence Code, Mara Sánchez.
Yes, powered by Amethyst Therapy Services. And for those of you listening, this deep dive is part of our complete RBT task list series. Today, we are conquering task list item B.2.
And to do this, we're pulling from a really robust stack of foundational material.
We brought the receipts today.
We really did. We're looking closely at the Amethyst Therapy Services RBT curriculum, specifically their scenarios on behavioral intelligence and assessment protocols. We're also referencing essential excerpts from the classic Cooper, Heron, and Heward text.
The White Book.
The famous White Book, yes. The foundational text of behavior analysis. And of course, we are integrating the Behavior Analyst Certification Board strict guidelines, the BACB Ethics Code, and the RBT Handbook.
Right. And we are not just talking about what to do, like reciting a list of rules. We are looking at the exact mechanisms of why these rules exist.
Exactly. Because memorizing a rule doesn't help you in the moment when a kid is crying. Understanding the science does.
So for you listening right now, why does this matter? Why dedicate a whole deep dive to this? Well, practically speaking, Domain B assessment accounts for a significant chunk of the RBT exam. It's about 11%.
But beyond the exam, you need to understand this because of what just happened to Leo.
Right. The false positive.
If the baseline data is flawed, the entire intervention plan built by the supervisor is flawed. You are essentially building a house on sand.
Which is dangerous.
Very. But before we get into the exact mechanics of what an RBT actually does in the room, We need to establish what a behavioral assessment actually is.
Okay, let's start there. Because when I hear the word assessment, my brain immediately goes to a very specific image.
Like a high school test.
Yeah, or like a sterile room, right. A psychologist with a stopwatch, maybe asking me to solve block puzzles or define vocabulary words, and at the end, I get a score.
A single number.
Exactly, a static number that says, I am in the 75th percentile for cognitive functioning. It feels very permanent, like a final report card on my brain.
That is exactly the traditional psychological model. And the Cooper text explicitly contrasts behavioral assessment with that traditional model.
How so?
Traditional psychological and educational assessments rely heavily on norm-referenced, standardized tests.
Yeah.
They are attempting to measure broad, internal, unobservable constructs.
Like what?
Like they are trying to measure intelligence or aptitude or executive functioning. They look at how you perform on a test to infer what is happening invisibly inside your head.
But behavioral assessment fundamentally rejects that, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't care about the invisible internal state.
It's not that behavior analysts don't believe internal states exist. It's that internal states cannot be reliably observed, measured, or directly changed by another person.
Because I can't actually see your thoughts.
Right. I can't measure a thought with a timer. So behavioral assessment relies on direct observation of the individual in their actual environment.
Real-world data.
Exactly. We are talking about direct observations, targeted interviews, and specific checklists. The goal isn't to give someone a generalized score or a permanent label like developmentally delayed.
What is the goal then?
The goal is to identify and define very specific observable behaviors that we want to change. What does the behavior look like? How often does it happen? And what environmental factors are keeping it alive?
Let me stop you there, because there is something in the Amethyst materials that completely shifted my perspective on this.
Oh, what was that?
Well, when we talk about finding behaviors to change, it sort of sounds like a deficit hunt, right? Like we are just walking in with a clipboard to list every single thing a person does wrong or can't do.
A lot of people think that.
But the texts hammer home that comprehensive behavioral assessments are just as much about discovering resources, assets, and potential reinforcers. Identifying a learner's strengths is just as crucial as identifying their deficits.
It absolutely is.
Why is that? If they already have the strength, they already know how to do it, why do we need to spend precious clinical time assessing it?
Because strengths are the raw materials you use to build the new skills.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, if you only assess what a learner cannot do, you're operating entirely from a deficit model. And that is frustrating for everyone. It's incredibly inefficient.
It's just focusing on the negative.
Right. But if you identify their strengths, you can leverage those existing repertoires. Let's look at a real ABA example. Let's say you have a child who has zero ability to request a glass of water when they are thirsty.
Okay, so a total deficit in what we call manding.
Exactly. A mand is a request.
Oh.
Total deficit. But during your assessment, you notice that this child has a fantastic echoic repertoire.
Meaning they can copy what you say.
Yes. If you say helicopter, they instantly and perfectly say helicopter.
So they can physically speak and they can mimic sounds perfectly.
Precisely. That is a massive strength. The behavior analyst can now design a program that uses that echoic strength to teach the requesting deficit.
How would that look in a session?
The RBT might hold up the cup of water and say water. The child echoes water, and then the RBT immediately gives them the drink.
Ah, so they get the payoff.
Right. Over time, you slowly fade out the echoic prompt until they just see the water and ask for it.
Yeah.
But if you hadn't assessed for the strength initially, you wouldn't know you had that specific tool in your toolbox.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so if traditional testing is like getting a static report card at the end of the semester, behavioral assessment is more like, well, it's like scouting a football team on the actual field.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You aren't just looking at the final score on a board in the locker room. You are watching the game tape. You are looking at how the players move, what plays actually work, what specific athletes are sitting on the bench as resources, and what the weather and the turf conditions, the environment, are doing to the game.
That analogy actually connects perfectly to a specific study highlighted in the Cooper text. It explains exactly how we define what we are measuring out on that field.
Which study is that?
It's the Warden-Carnes study from 2002. They were studying skill execution by college football players, specifically linebackers. They needed to objectively measure if a tackle was executed correctly.
Right, and when I first read about this study, I assumed they would have this incredibly dense, complex rubric.
Like a huge checklist.
Yeah, I figured they'd be measuring the exact angle of the player's spine, the placement of the cleats on the grass, the momentum in foot-pounds, whether both arms wrapped around the waist at precisely 45 degrees.
It sounds exhausting just thinking about it.
Right, but they didn't do any of that. They defined a correct tackle simply as if the offensive ball carrier was stopped. That was the entire definition.
Yes.
My question is why? Why not measure the exact physical topography of the tackle? Doesn't the science demand more detail than that?
The science demands reliability and accuracy above all else. What you're describing, the angle of the arms, the foot placement, is a topographical definition.
Topography meaning what it looks like on the outside.
Exactly. Topography is what the behavior looks like. The problem with topographical definitions is that they can be incredibly subjective in real time.
Like hard to agree on.
Yes. If 3 different coaches are watching a game tape, one might say the angle was 45 degrees, another says it was 50 degrees, a third says the arms weren't fully wrapped. They will disagree. Your data becomes unreliable.
And bad data is useless.
But Ward and Carnes used a functional definition. Function is about the effect the behavior has on the environment.
And the required effect on the environment in football is that the guy with the ball stops moving forward.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It is binary. It is clean. Either the ball carrier's forward progress was halted by the linebacker, or it wasn't. All 3 coaches watching that tape will agree 100% of the time.
Because it's obvious.
Right. The Cooper text points out that simpler functional definitions lead to much easier, more accurate, and more reliable measurement. And if you don't have a reliable way to measure the behavior, you cannot possibly know if your coaching or your clinical intervention is actually working.
Which brings up a critical distinction the text makes about how we evaluate if something is working. It talks about summative evaluation versus formative assessment.
Yes. This is the huge concept. Summative evaluation is what the general public usually thinks of as testing.
Like a final exam.
Right. You measure the behavior before the treatment starts, you run the treatment for, say, 6 months, and then you take another measurement at the very end to see if it worked. You are summarizing the entire experience.
Okay, give me an analogy for that.
It's like stepping on a scale on January 1st, starting a brand new diet, and then not stepping on the scale again until July 1st.
That sounds terrifying. What if the diet wasn't working in February? You just wasted 5 months eating kale for nothing.
That is exactly the danger. And that is why behavioral assessment relies heavily on formative assessment instead.
So what is formative assessment?
Formative assessment means taking frequent, often daily, measures of behavior during the treatment process. It allows for dynamic, data-based decision-making.
So checking the scale every week.
Exactly. If you are tracking a student's reading fluency, you don't just test them in September and then again in June. You test them every Tuesday. Because if the data shows the intervention isn't working by the 3rd Tuesday, you change the intervention.
You aren't flying blind.
Exactly.
There is a great example in the materials of a teacher judging a student's reading progress subjectively. The teacher listens to the kid read and just thinks, he sounds about the same as last week. He's struggling. This isn't working.
Right, going by their gut.
But if the teacher was actually taking formative data, they might see that last week the student read 70 words per minute, and this week they read 80 words per minute.
Which is a huge jump.
Right. But to the naked human ear, it just sounds like a kid reading slowly. But the objective data reveals a clear, steady trend of improvement. The teacher might have literally canceled a perfectly good intervention just because human perception is flawed.
Human perception is incredibly flawed. We are biased, we get tired, our moods influence our judgment. That frequent objective measurement is the only defense we have. And in the field of applied behavior analysis, that ground-level daily data collection relies almost entirely on the registered behavior technician.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that. Let's look at the RBT's exact role in this puzzle. The Amethyst materials have this phenomenal memory hack for understanding the RBT's scope during a skill assessment.
I love this one.
It breaks the entire job down into 3 simple words: probe, record, report.
Probe, record, report.
I love this because it just strips away all the anxiety of trying to be a clinician. Probe, record, report. Let's explore exactly what each of those means in practice. What does it actually look like in the clinic room when I probe?
A probe is an assessment trial where you ask the client to perform a specific task to check their current skill level. You are testing to see if a skill is present in their repertoire or if it is absent.
Like testing the water.
Exactly. We do this to establish a baseline before we start teaching a new skill, or we do it to check for mastery after we think a skill has been learned. You are essentially taking a high-definition photograph of their capability at that exact second in time.
But I'm not teaching.
Emphatically, no. You are simply presenting the opportunity, the discriminative stimulus, or SD, and observing what happens.
Which brings us to step 2, record.
You document the response objectively, exactly as it occurred in the physical world.
Without putting my own spin on it.
Right. You do not interpret what you think the client meant. You do not write down, "He pointed to the wrong card, but I know he knew the right one. He was just really tired today."
Which is so tempting.
It is. But you record the topography and function of what actually happened.
And finally, report.
You give that unvarnished objective data to your supervising BCBA. The supervisor is the one who takes that raw data, analyzes the trends, and makes the clinical decisions about what to teach next.
So the RBT does not interpret the assessment results.
Never. The RBT does not independently decide to change the behavior plan because the data looked a certain way.
I have an analogy for this that I think really clarifies the professional boundaries perfectly.
Let's hear it.
The BCBA is the architect. They're designing a massive, complex skyscraper. The RBT is the surveyor.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The surveyor goes out to the empty dirt lot with their laser levels and their measuring tapes, and they figure out exactly what the terrain looks like. The surveyor doesn't decide where the load-bearing walls go.
No, they don't.
And more importantly, if the surveyor finds a massive sinkhole right in the middle of the lot, they don't say, "Oh man, the architect is going to be so bummed about this sinkhole, I'll just kick some dirt over it so the report looks nicer."
That is a perfect analogy. If the surveyor hides the sinkhole, the architect builds the skyscraper on top of it, and the entire building eventually collapses.
It's a disaster.
The architect cannot do their job if the surveyor gives them massaged, falsified, or overly optimistic data. They need brutally honest measurements of the land.
So as the surveyor, what specific tools am I actually taking out into the field? The curriculum details 4 main types of skill assessments that RBTs assist with. Let's walk through what these actually look and feel like in real life. The first one is curriculum-based assessments. The text uses these massive acronyms here like the ABL-LSR or the VBM-APP. For someone who has never seen these, what are they?
These are comprehensive assessment tools used to identify specific skill deficits and strengths across a really wide variety of developmental domains. We are talking about language, play skills, motor skills, academic readiness.
So it covers a lot of ground.
Physically, something like the VBM-APP often looks like a very thick, spiral-bound protocol book filled with incredibly specific tasks and a complex scoring grid. It provides a sequence of learning objectives.
So it will say something like, can the child tact or label 20 different items in their environment?
Yes.
And as the RBT, how do I participate in that?
Your job is to present the items exactly, to the letter, as the assessment manual directs. If the manual says you must present an array of 3 pictures on a table and say exactly the phrase, touch the car, use exactly that.
I can't ad-lib.
No. You cannot say, hey, buddy, where's the vroom? You cannot point at the car. You follow the script.
Okay, got it. The second type, developmental assessments.
These are designed to compare a learner's current skills to standard developmental norms. At what chronological age do typical children learn to stack 3 blocks or follow a 2-step instruction like stand up and clap?
And again, my role.
Again, the RBT's role is to deliver the items completely neutrally. You're trying to capture their natural developmental level against a normed milestone, not their ability to be coaxed into doing something.
The third one is fascinating to me. Social skills assessments. This sounds a lot looser than a structured test with flashcards at a table.
It is, which actually makes it much harder to run without bias. We are assessing the client's social interaction repertoire.
Like how they act around other kids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do they initiate play with a peer? How do they respond if a peer tries to take their toy? The RBT runs these probes by setting up the environment, maybe taking the client to a playground or a social skills group,
But
observing.
Watching.
Critically, you must observe without prompting. You want to see the natural social behavior unfold organically.
But that goes against every single adult instinct. If I'm on a playground with a client and another kid comes up and says, hi, and my client just stares at the ground, my instinct is to gently nudge my client and whisper, say hi back, buddy.
And if you do that, you have destroyed the social skills assessment.
Because I interfered.
Exactly. If you prompt them, you haven't assessed their social skills, you have assessed their instruction following skills, You now know that they can follow your whispered command, but you still have absolutely no idea what their natural social initiation looks like.
Oh, that is such an important distinction. Okay, the fourth type is adaptive behavior scales. What does this cover?
These measure daily living and independent skills. Things like dressing, eating, personal hygiene, navigating the community safely.
Like brushing teeth.
Yes. Can the client brush their teeth independently? Can they make a sandwich? The curriculum explicitly states that for these scales, the RBT should model the behavior only if the specific assessment protocol tells you to.
And if it doesn't?
Otherwise, no teaching, no modeling, no prompting. You are observing current independence.
So if I demonstrate how to squeeze the toothpaste onto the brush, I'm giving them a visual prompt and the data is ruined.
Correct.
It sounds so simple when we talk about it in theory. Just measure the land, just probe, record, report.
Right.
But we aren't measuring dirt and rocks. We are interacting with highly vulnerable human beings, often children, whom we care about deeply.
Which is where it gets complicated.
Exactly. Which brings us to the danger zone. The Amethyst materials have a whole section on common mistakes to avoid during assessments. I was reading through some mock scenarios based on this list, and I realized I would have failed almost all of them on my first day.
Don't feel bad. These mistakes are universal because they are rooted in human empathy. But they are toxic to the science. Let's break them down.
The first one goes right back to Leo from our intro, providing prompts or hints during an assessment. We already covered why that's bad. It creates a false positive. You are measuring a prompted skill, not an independent skill.
Right.
But what about the second mistake? Reinforcing correct responses during testing.
This is a massive trap for new RBTs.
I just don't understand why this is a trap. Isn't the entirety of applied behavior analysis built on the concept of reinforcement? We want to reinforce good behavior so it happens more often. If Leo gets the flashcard right, why on earth wouldn't I give him a high five and a piece of a preferred snack?
Because of when you were doing it.
Explain that.
During intervention, during the teaching phase, absolutely, we use reinforcement constantly. That is the engine of behavior change. But an assessment is a baseline probe. During a baseline probe, providing reinforcement changes the performance.
Okay, tracking.
Think about the mechanics of behavior. If you are trying to find out how often a child spontaneously raises their hand in a classroom without any intervention, you just need to watch and count.
Just observe the natural rate.
Right, but if every single time they raise their hand, you run over and give them a piece of candy, what is going to happen?
They are going to start raising their hand every 5 seconds.
Exactly. You are no longer measuring their baseline natural rate of spontaneous hand raising. You are now measuring how well they respond to a fixed ratio candy reinforcement schedule.
Wow.
You have introduced a brand new, highly motivating variable that artificially inflates the data. The BCBA will look at your data and think the child naturally raises their hand 50 times an hour.
So during an assessment, I literally have to maintain a neutral poker face. No high fives, no great job, no tickles.
You must remain neutral regarding the accuracy of their response.
Okay.
You can and should reinforce compliance and attending. You can say things like, I love how nicely you're sitting, or thanks for working hard with me, but you absolutely cannot reinforce the correct answers to the test items. It can feel cold, but it is a temporary necessity for valid data collection.
All right, the third mistake on the list is skipping items because they appear too difficult. I completely get why an RBT would do this. You were doing a math assessment, the kid is getting frustrated, they're starting to tear up.
It's hard to watch.
You look ahead to the next question, and it's long division. You know they can't do it. Your instinct is to just skip it, to save them the emotional distress.
It's an empathy-driven error. But by doing that, you have made a clinical judgment you are not authorized or qualified to make. You have left a blind spot in the data.
How so?
The BCBA needs to know exactly where the skill breaks down. Does it break down at single-digit multiplication, or does it break down at multi-digit division? If you skip it, the BCBA doesn't know.
And what if they actually could do it? What if they learned long division at home and you just assumed they didn't know it? You've just artificially capped their capability in the assessment.
Precisely. You must follow the protocol until the protocol explicitly tells you to stop. Most standardized assessments have a ceiling, meaning a rule that says, stop the assessment if the client gets 5 consecutive answers wrong. But you wait for the rule, you don't make up the rule.
Okay, I want to pivot here because the Amethyst materials emphasize how important this is for the exam. I want to go through 5 specific RBT-style multiple-choice questions right now to really cement these concepts.
Let's do it.
Listeners, I'm going to read the question. Think about your answer before we break it down.
Okay.
Question 1. An RDT is assisting with a VB-MPG assessment. The RBT presents an array of pictures and asks the client to touch the car. The client hesitates and looks confused. What should the RBT do?
Point to the car to help the client understand.
Record the response as incorrect or no response and move on.
Ask the question a different way, like, where is the vroom vroom?
Give the client a piece of candy to encourage them to try.
This perfectly encapsulates what we just discussed.
Right, so if we look at the distractors, option A is providing a prompt. We know that's wrong because it ruins the baseline.
Exactly. Option C is changing the discriminative stimulus. The protocol dictates the exact phrasing. If you say vroom vroom, you aren't running the VB MPP anymore.
And option D is introducing a reinforcer before they even answer, or reinforcing the hesitation.
So the only correct answer is B. Record the response as incorrect or no response and move on. You probe, record, report.
Perfect. Okay, question 2. During a baseline probe for a matching skill, the client correctly matches the picture of the apple to another picture of an apple. What is the most appropriate response from the RBT?
Say, great job matching, and give a token.
Provide a gentle high five.
Maintain a neutral expression, record the correct response, and present the next trial.
Stop the assessment because the client has mastered the skill.
Another classic scenario.
Options A and B are both providing reinforcement for a correct response. We just talked about how that inflates the baseline data.
Right. It creates a false positive and natural occurrence. What about option D?
You can't just stop the assessment based on one correct trial. That's making a clinical judgment outside the RBT scope.
Exactly. So the answer is C. Neutral expression, record the data, move on.
Okay, question 3. And this one confused me at first. I was reading a scenario where an RBT is conducting a skill assessment. The learner answers an item incorrectly, and the question asks what the RBT should do.
Let's hear the options.
Option A, immediately provide the correct answer so they don't learn the error.
Use the standard 4-step error correction procedure.
Tell the client, oops, try again.
Record the response as incorrect and proceed to the next item. My immediate instinct was option B. Use the 4-step error correction. The Amethyst book has a whole section dedicated to represent, prompt, reinforce, distractor. The book explicitly says if a client makes an error, you do that. So why wouldn't I do that here?
Does the book contradict itself?
It doesn't contradict itself. It is talking about two completely different phases of therapy. You have to categorize where you are in the treatment process.
Yeah.
The standard 4-step error correction belongs strictly in the realm of behavior acquisition. That is a teaching procedure.
Teaching, not assessing. Right. You use that after the baseline assessment is complete, when you're actively trying to build a new skill. The scenario you were reading was explicitly set during a skill assessment. During a test, you do not use teaching procedures. If you teach during a test, the test is no longer a test.
No. It's the difference between taking the SATs and studying for the SATs with a tutor.
Exactly.
The proctor at the SAT isn't going to give you a 4-step error correction if you bubble in the wrong math answer. They're just going to record it as wrong. Boom. That makes perfect sense. So the answer is D.
Right. Record as incorrect and proceed.
Okay. Question 4. We are shifting gears to preferences. Listen to this one. An RBT conducts a multiple stimulus without replacement, an MSWO preference assessment. The client selects a toy dinosaur on 85% of the trials. The RBT concludes that the toy dinosaur is a reinforcer and uses it for a new toilet training program. Why is this reasoning flawed?
The RBT should have used a single stimulus assessment instead.
Preference does not equal reinforcement.
Yeah.
A reinforcer is only confirmed if it increases behavior.
85% is not high enough to be considered a reinforcer. It must be 100%.
Toys cannot be used for toilet training. Only edibles are effective.
This is perhaps one of the most profound and misunderstood concepts in all of applied behavior analysis.
I know. I was shocked by this. Because if he picks it 85% of the time, obviously he likes it.
Yes, he likes it, but preference does not equal reinforcement.
So option B is the answer. Let's really break that down.
Just because a client highly prefers playing with a toy dinosaur when it is offered to them for free does not guarantee they will exert the immense effort required to learn a difficult new skill-like toilet training to earn access to it.
Let me try an analogy here. I absolutely love chocolate cake.
Who doesn't?
If you put a slice of chocolate cake on a table in front of me, alongside an apple, a granola bar, and a bowl of spinach, I am picking the chocolate cake 100% of the time. I highly prefer it.
Correct. You have a high preference.
But if you tell me that the only way I can have that slice of chocolate cake is if I go outside right now and run a full 26-mile marathon in the pouring rain, I'm not doing it. I'll just sit on the couch and not eat cake.
Exactly. The cake is highly preferred, but it is not a strong enough reinforcer to increase your marathon running behavior.
That is such a clear distinction.
A reinforcer is defined empirically and solely by its effect on behavior. It is a functional definition. Just like the football tackle we talked about earlier, if the contingent delivery of the item does not increase the future frequency of the target behavior, it is not a reinforcer.
Yeah.
Period.
So a preference assessment just gives you a good guess.
Right. It gives you a hypothesis. A reinforcer assessment, actually testing it against a demand, tests that hypothesis.
Beautiful. All right, last question, question 5. This is an ethics one. An RBT is taking data on a client's aggressive behaviors. Midway through the session, the RBT's tablet battery dies, and they lose 45 minutes of data collection time. After the session, the RBT tries to remember how many times the client hit the table and enters an estimate into the system. This is an example of
Formative assessment,
acceptable data recovery,
data fraud, and a violation of the ethics code.
scope of practice.
Oh, this is a big one.
And it feels so innovant. You're just trying to help, try not to have a blank data sheet.
But the answer is unequivocally C. It is data fraud.
Let's hold on that thought, because we are going to dive deep into that exact scenario in just a minute. But first, since we are already talking about preferences and behaviors, let's talk about how we figure out why a problem behavior is occurring in the first place.
Right. The RBT task list explicitly mentions participating in components of functional assessment procedures.
This is the functional behavior assessment, or FBA, because all behavior happens for a reason, right?
Exactly. Behavior is communication. We need to find out what environmental variables are maintaining this behavior, what are the antecedents, the triggers that happen immediately before, and what are the consequences, the payoffs that happen immediately after.
So, like, is the client engaging in severe aggression because it successfully allows them to escape a difficult math worksheet?
Or are they doing it to gain the attention of a busy parent? Are they doing it to access an iPad? Or are they doing it for automatic sensory reinforcement, like a self-stimulatory behavior?
The curriculum breaks the FBA down into 3 main methods, and it is very strict about what the RBT does versus what the BCBA does. The first is indirect assessments. These are rating scales, questionnaires, and interviews with parents or teachers.
And the RBT's role here is very limited. The BCBA designs, conducts, and analyzes these formal interviews. The RBT might provide informal observations from their sessions, but they are not the ones administering the Vineland or the FAST questionnaires.
The second method is descriptive or direct assessment. This involves direct observation in the natural environment. And this is where the RBT basically lives, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The most common tool here is ABC data: antecedent, behavior, consequence. The Cooper text notes this framework was first formalized by B.2, Peterson, and Alt back in 1968. It is the bread and butter of behavioral observation.
It really is.
I want to paint a picture of what this looks like for a new RBT.
Yeah.
You're an RBT in a classroom. The teacher tells the client to sit down and do a worksheet. That's the antecedent.
Right, the trigger.
The client flips the desk over. That's the behavior.
The observable action.
The teacher yells, "Go to the principal's office." That's the consequence. You write all this down on a chart.
Exactly. You record exactly what you observe without any mentalistic explanations. You don't write, "He got mad." You write, "He flipped the desk."
But the textbook has a huge flashing warning sign about ABC data. It says ABC data reveals patterns, but it does not confirm the function of the behavior. And this confused me.
Why did it confuse you?
Well, if I have a month of data showing that every single time the teacher presents math, the kid flips the desk and he gets sent to the principal's office, hasn't that definitively proven he is doing it to escape math? Why isn't that confirmation?
Because it only demonstrates correlation, not causation.
Ah, the golden rule of science.
Right. In a natural environment like a classroom, there are dozens of uncontrolled variables happening simultaneously. You saw the math worksheet and the desk flip, but what else was happening?
I don't know. A lot of things.
Maybe the math worksheet was printed on a specific color paper and the child is reacting to the visual stimulus. Maybe a specific peer sits next to him only during math, and the child only flips the desk when that peer is looking at him, and going to the principal's office is actually providing massive attention from the principal.
Oh, wow.
Descriptive data cannot rule out those confounding variables.
It's like observing that people carry umbrellas when it rains. You could logically hypothesize that carrying umbrellas causes water to fall from the sky. It's a very strong pattern.
But it's functionally backward.
Exactly. Which brings us to the absolute gold standard of assessment, the third method, the functional analysis, or FA.
Yes.
The text says an FA experimentally demonstrates the maintaining variable rather than just generating a hypothesis.
The key word there is experimental. In a functional analysis, the BCBA systematically manipulates the antecedents and consequences in a controlled environment to isolate the exact variable controlling the behavior. They intentionally turn the variables on and off.
Can you describe what that actually looks like in a clinic? Like, what is an escape condition?
Imagine a sterile, safe clinic room. The BCBA and the RBT are in there with the client. During the escape condition, the therapist presents a highly non-preferred task, like difficult academic work.
Good.
If the client engages in the target problem behavior, say, hitting the table, the therapist immediately removes the work and says, okay, you don't have to do it, and turns away for 30 seconds. They do this repeatedly. If the behavior spikes high in the specific condition, you have proven that escape is the reinforcer.
And contrast that with the attention condition.
In the attention condition, the therapist might sit in the room reading a magazine, completely ignoring the client. No demands are placed. If the client engages in the problem behavior, the therapist immediately provides attention, even if it's a reprimand like, don't hit the table, you could hurt your hand. If the behavior spikes here, you prove attention is the function.
By comparing these conditions, you prove causation.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible science. But what is the RBT's role in this? Because intentionally triggering a severe problem behavior like self-injury or aggression sounds incredibly intense and potentially dangerous.
It is, which is why an FA is a highly specialized procedure. An RBT only participates in a functional analysis if they are specifically, rigorously trained on that exact protocol and are directly supervised by the BCBA in the moment. The RBT does not design the FA or decide when to run it.
These incredibly strict lines between what an RBT can and cannot do naturally bring us to the most serious part of this entire deep dive. It's time for our Ethics Minute.
Let's do it.
We are talking about scope of practice and data integrity.
Ethics in applied behavior analysis are not just corporate guidelines or, friendly suggestions. They are the bedrock of consumer protection. The BACB ethics code is rigorous because the clients we serve are often highly vulnerable.
Which brings us back to question 5 from earlier. The Amethyst curriculum has a giant ethics alert section regarding data collection. I want to read the core of it. Altering, omitting, or backfilling data regardless of intent constitutes data fraud and is a serious violation of the BACB ethics code. All data must be recorded as observed in real time without modification.
This is arguably the most common ethical violation in the field, and it almost never happens out of malice. It happens out of convenience or panic.
Let's paint a picture of how this happens. An RBT is having an incredibly stressful session. The client is engaging in high rates of challenging behavior. The RBT is trying to keep everyone safe, and they realize they forgot their tablet in the other room or the battery died.
It happens to the best of us.
An hour goes by. The session ends. The RBT sits in their car, looks at a blank data sheet, and thinks, okay, I know he was aggressive today, I'll just estimate. He probably hit his head about 5 times, and he successfully tacted Apple 3 times. They write it down. It feels harmless. It feels better than leaving it blank.
But it is catastrophic to the clinical process.
I have a metaphor for this that I think makes the stakes really clear. Think of a major crime scene. A detective arrives, and they need to build an exact timeline of events to solve the case. They need to know what time the victim arrived, what time the suspect was seen, and the precise sequence of the struggle.
Right. The timeline is everything.
Now, imagine a witness decides to estimate retroactively.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard the glass break around noon, or maybe it was 2 p.m.
Right.
And someone might have yelled before the glass broke, or maybe it was after. By putting those guesses into the official police report, the witness is essentially tampering with evidence. They're destroying the actual timeline.
That is exactly what happens with behavioral data. When you estimate data retroactively, when you backfill, you lose the temporal information. You lose the exact sequence of antecedents and consequences. But worst of all, you are presenting a guess as a scientific fact.
The architect thinks the terrain is solid when it isn't.
Exactly. The BCBA looks at that fabricated data and makes clinical decisions that affect a human being's developmental trajectory. If the data says a dangerous behavior is decreasing when it actually isn't, the BCBA might remove a safety protocol and the client could be seriously harmed.
So backfilling data is fraud. Period.
Yes. If you miss the data, you leave it blank, you write a clinical note explaining that data was lost due to safety concerns or equipment failure, and you move on. Honesty is the only ethical option.
Let's pivot to scope of practice, which is another massive ethical pillar in our Ethics Minute. We touched on this with the architect and surveyor, but the curriculum lists exactly what is outside the RBT scope. I want to go through these. RBTs do not design or modify behavior plans. They do not interpret assessment results. They do not diagnose, counsel, or make clinical recommendations to the parents. And they do not independently change procedures based on their own judgment.
This is where ego and ambition can sometimes lead RBTs astray. Many RBTs are incredibly smart, experienced, and capable. They are in school to become BCBAs. They understand the science. But while they are wearing the RBT hat, they must stay in their lane.
The curriculum provides a great real-world scenario on this. Let's say a client's progress on a matching program is stalled entirely across 3 or 4 sessions. The data is completely flat.
As an RBT who cares about the client, you see this, and your brain immediately starts problem solving. You think, this current prompting hierarchy isn't working. He's bored. I know a better way to teach this. I'm going to switch from least to most prompting to most to least prompting today, just to get him over the hump.
That feels like initiative. It feels like being a good, proactive employee.
But it is the incorrect action. That is stepping entirely outside your scope of practice. You are taking a sledgehammer to the architect's blueprints without asking. You might actually be ruining a systematic probe the BCBA had carefully planned.
So what should the RBT do?
The correct evidence-based action is to continue collecting accurate data, maintain strict procedural integrity to the written plan, and notify the supervising BCBA immediately. The BCBA will review the data and make the necessary adjustments to the plan. You report the sinkhole, you don't pour your own concrete into it.
And these ethical boundaries extend way beyond just the clinical procedures in the binder. They extend into the messy reality of professional relationships. The text includes a scenario about dual relationships that I know happens all the time.
It really does.
An RBT is working in a client's home. The family loves the RBT. The kid loves the RBT. One day the mother says, "Hey, my husband and I desperately need a date night this Saturday. You already know how to handle his behaviors. He's so comfortable with you. We will pay you double your hourly rate to just come babysit for 4 hours on Saturday night. No ABA, just watching a movie."
It seems like a total win-win. The parents get a safe sitter, the RBT gets extra money, but ethically, under the BACB code, the RBT must decline respectfully. Accepting this creates a dual relationship or a multiple relationship.
Why is it so dangerous?
Because you cannot be a client's objective clinical professional on Tuesday and their private weekend employee on Saturday. It blurs boundaries, creates massive conflicts of interest, and compromises clinical objectivity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What happens if, during the babysitting gig, the parents ask you to just run a few trials of his ABA goals while you are off the clock? Who is supervising that? Who is liable if he gets hurt?
That's a huge liability.
Or even worse, what if you observe a serious safety concern or potential abuse in the home while babysitting? As a mandated reporter in an RBT, you have to report it. But now you rely on these parents for your weekend rent money. Will you hesitate to report? It is a massive ethical entanglement that must be avoided entirely.
The boundaries have to be absolute. And it's not just the BACB ethics code we have to worry about either. There is a scenario in the materials regarding billing Medicaid and insurance for services. An RBT assumes that as long as they aren't breaking the BACB ethics code, their billing is fine.
And that is a very dangerous assumption.
Right. The supervisor corrects the RBT, pointing out that you must also identify and comply with the funders and regulators' specific documentation, coding, and billing requirements. These often go far beyond the ethics code.
You're dealing with the law at that point.
Exactly. You are answering to federal law, state law, insurance mandates, and organizational policies. If you backfill data and then bill Medicaid for that session, it isn't just an ethics violation with the board. It can be investigated as Medicaid fraud, which carries massive civil fines and actual criminal penalties. The stakes are not just a slap on the wrist. They are legal.
Which is exactly why the BACB does not just take your word for it that you know how to navigate all of this. They don't just hand you a certificate, pat you on the back, and say, good luck. They require ongoing objective proof.
That brings us to our final area of focus today. Let's talk about supervisor insight and the competency evaluation. Because with all these incredibly strict rules about prompting, baseline testing, and data integrity, how does the field ensure that RBTs actually know how to perform these assessments correctly in the real world?
They ensure it through the RBT Recertification Competency Assessment. This is not a multiple choice test you take on a computer once and forget about. It is an annual requirement. RBTs must demonstrate ongoing practical proficiency in these exact skills through direct observation by a qualified supervisor.
The BACB document highlights that this is necessary because of the integral hands-on activities an RBT performs on the service delivery team. The surveyor has to prove they know how to use the laser level every year. How does this evaluation actually happen? The document lists 3 ways the supervisor can observe you.
The first and most preferred method is with a client. The BCBA, or an assistant assessor under their guidance, physically sits in the room or watches via secure video, while the RBT performs the specific task in vivo with a client receiving services.
So they watch you run a baseline probe.
Right. They watch to see if you accidentally prompt the child.
But what if you don't have a client who needs a baseline probe that week?
Then they use the second method, role play. The assessor observes the RBT performing the task in a simulated situation. The BCBA might act as the client, throwing problem behaviors at you, intentionally giving wrong answers to see how you respond.
That sounds intense.
It's great practice. The third method is interview. For certain conceptual items, the assessor conducts a live interview where the RBT has to describe the concept, define the boundaries, and provide real-world examples.
What the supervisor is ultimately looking for here is procedural integrity. That is the buzzword. Are you implementing the protocol exactly as it is written on the page? If the task is to assist with an ABL-LSR skill assessment, do you probe, record, and report without adding your own teaching flair?
Exactly.
Here's my anxiety-driven question, though. What happens if I mess up? What if the BCBA is watching me role play or watching me with a client, and my human instinct takes over, and I accidentally give the kid a little hint during the assessment? Do I fail? Do I lose my certification on the spot? Am I fired?
No. The system is designed to build and ensure true competency, not just to punish human errors. If an RBT does not demonstrate competence in a task, the assessor immediately stops and gives corrective feedback. They explain exactly what went wrong and how to fix it. However, and this is critical, they cannot just let you try it again right then, check the box, and pass you.
Why not? If I fix it, I fixed it.
Because doing it right immediately after being told how to do it is just following a prompt. It doesn't prove mastery. The guidelines state they must assess that task with you on another day. The process is repeated until competence is demonstrated independently. You have to prove you can walk into the room on a Tuesday, cold, and execute the procedure flawlessly without immediate coaching. It's about true fluency.
That makes a lot of sense. It protects the client by ensuring the RBT actually knows the skill deeply. And speaking of supervisors, there's a fascinating point in the Amethyst materials about how supervisors evaluate themselves.
Right.
It's not just the RBTs under the microscope.
This is a phenomenal point to close our analysis on because it brings the entire philosophy of behavior analysis full circle. Everything comes back to the data.
The scenario presents a BCBA who wants an honest read on whether her coaching and supervision of a new RBT is actually working. A colleague suggests she just look at her billing software to see how many supervision hours she logged and reflect on how confident she feels about the RBT's progress.
Which is entirely subjective and mentalistic. It's the equivalent of the teacher assuming the kid is reading better just by listening.
Exactly. The correct approach is that the BCBA must evaluate the efficacy of her own supervision using objective data on the supervisee's performance and ultimately on the client's outcomes.
Data-based decision-making applies to every level of the hierarchy. You don't just measure the client's behavior, you measure the technician's behavior. And you measure the supervisor's impact on the technician's behavior. If the BCBA bills 20 hours of supervision, but the RBT is still consistently providing prompts during baseline assessments, the supervisor's training is a failure. The hours don't matter. The functional effect on the environment matters.
If the surveyor is still mapping the sinkhole wrong, the architect's training program for surveyors is broken. It is a completely accountable system. Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today, diving deep into the realities, the mechanics, and the ethics of RBT task list item B.2. To lock this in, let's do a rapid review of the core concepts we unpacked today.
Let's do it. First, behavioral assessments differ fundamentally from traditional psychological tests. We do not use indirect measures to guess at internal cognitive states. We use direct observation in the natural environment to identify specific, observable target behaviors, identifying both the deficits we need to teach and the strengths we can leverage to teach them.
Second, during skill assessments, the RBT is the objective surveyor. Your job is to deliver items completely neutrally and record exactly what happens to establish a baseline. Remember the ultimate memory hack. Probe, record, report. Do not prompt, do not teach, do not interpret.
Third, reinforcing or prompting a client during a baseline test completely invalidates the data. It shifts the measurement from an independent skill to a prompted or reinforced performance. This creates a false positive, leading the BCBA to make flawed clinical decisions that can deprive the client of necessary teaching.
Fourth, preference does not equal reinforcement. Just because a client highly prefers a toy dinosaur during an MSWO preference assessment does not mean that toy will function as a reinforcer when a demand is placed. Preference predicts. Only behavioral data confirming an increase in the target behavior confirms.
And finally, number 5. Altering, estimating, or backfilling data is fraud. It destroys the temporal evidence required for functional analysis and places the client in clinical danger. Data must always be recorded as it occurs in real time.
Excellent. Now, to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to chew on. We started this hour by talking about how unnatural and even cold it feels to withhold a hint, or to withhold a smile and praise when a client is struggling during an assessment. We established thoroughly that these strict, neutral, somewhat artificial conditions are absolute scientific requirements for valid data collection.
They're the non-negotiable foundation of the science.
But think about this. If a baseline assessment requires such rigid, neutral, and artificially sterile conditions to be valid, how can we be absolutely sure we are capturing the learner's true, maximum capability in the real world?
That's a huge question.
Right. Are we truly measuring their holistic skill? Or are we sometimes just measuring their ability to endure a rigid testing environment? Does the complete removal of natural human reinforcement, the smiles, the high fives, the natural flow of conversation, during a test actually mask the very skills a client might easily, joyfully demonstrate in a more natural, socially fluid setting?
That is the eternal tension in behavioral measurement. It is the constant tightrope walk between maintaining experimental control and ensuring ecological validity.
It's the puzzle of the science. Keep that in mind the next time you are sitting across from a client like Leo. When you are holding that data sheet, trying to capture the vast, messy reality of human behavior in a tiny little box. You are a scientist, yes, but you are measuring a human being. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep probing, keep recording, and keep asking the big questions.